let's bring Michelle back in. Michelle, when you hear us talk about how hard it is to operate in these austere environments with the old, worn out equipment, I mean, how does that, you've talked to these guys, you've heard the same stories. What are your thoughts on how the team was equipped in terms of the missions that was being thrown at it?
Well, what I start thinking about is the fact that, so we're discussing, or what you guys have just been discussing a lot, is Afghanistan. So it's the same complexities, but then you add on top of it the lack of assets in the country of, especially Niger, those areas, they're sharing assets with other countries even. So we're talking about ISR that, it's with them on their mission. And as the mission gets extended, it runs out of fuel and has to be sent back home, and there is nothing to replace it. Afghanistan, you might have, something happens, you call in air support, and the air support can come and drop ordnance. That's not going to happen here. If the air support shows up, it's not going to show up in an hour. It's not going to show up in 2 hours. If it does show up, it might be the French, and they're not going to drop ordnance.
Yeah. Right.
So you're not talking the same thing.
Yeah. No, you're right. It is not the same thing. And we're talking about the complexities. So when you try to look at this and what these guys were up against in terms of equipment, it's almost impossible to be properly equipped, right? So they're going to have to make do with what they have.
Right. And so that's why when you're saying, comparing an orange to a basketball, it's almost like comparing an orange, like say Afghanistan's the size of an orange, and Africa, Niger alone, you're looking at the assets. And so you pull up the map of the United States, and there might be an asset up in Washington State, and there's another asset over in Texas, and you've got them up in the middle of, say Wisconsin, and they're going, we've got guys dying and we need somebody now. And we're sending in our Nigerian partner force trucks to save them. So we're talking, a 10-hour, 12-hour drive to go save, and so we're calling in Mexico to come in and, pick the guys up for us. It's insane. So yeah, it's very complex. And so when we had a casualty, that's why it was so important to listen to the commander on the ground, because when he's saying, hey, we can't do this, he understands that if one of his guys falls, we're talking 6 hours until they can get medevaced out of there. And that's on a good day. That's with all assets up and ready to go. And that happened. They managed to extract them in, I think 5 or 6 hours from the time the ambush started. But by then, people died in the first 45 minutes. So, and other guys nearly died waiting for the assets to come and pick them up.
This is a good point. Part of the thing is they get rescued. However, only barely, only through luck. If the other side had just pushed forward, it would have destroyed the entire team. Everybody would have died. So yes, we managed to pull these guys out, but only just barely. And honestly, a lot of luck involved. It sounds like from when you tell the story.
Yeah, there was a lot of luck involved, especially when you look at what happened with the communications on the ground. And, the terrorists, when they heard the French come in, they assumed the French would be able to land. They assumed the French would be able to bomb them. They didn't know none of that would happen, that the French would run out of fuel eventually and leave. If they had known all of this, every team member would have died. And there's that scene where they come face to face with the terrorists, and there's this unexplainable reason why they just turn around. And the guys must have planned on coming back with everyone, and the French just happened to show up right in between that time period. So there was a lot of luck involved.
Will you expand on that part of the story? I know what you're talking about from reading the book, but it's remarkable. Like so they've been on the run. They've been trying to get away from this kill zone, and they're bedded down in tall grass hiding, and they can hear the search party, the terrorists, searching for them and getting closer and closer and closer. They're encroaching in on them, and they're afraid to breathe. They're afraid to talk. They have to be so silent. And then, they hear him walking up. So what happens as these people have already killed them, they've already been in a major firefight with them, and now they're walking up and they're on top of them. What happens next?
It's remarkable, actually. The two youngest men on the team are now having to command the team because everybody else is out of the fight. They're, like you said, laying in tall grass, and there's like a little divot that they're able to kind of bury themselves into in the dirt. And as they're sitting there just holding their breath, they hear people walk up on them on either side. And fortunately, the men are both facing out with their weapons ready to go. And it was like a slow motion. They step by step walk up on the guys, and two men on this team make eye contact with the terrorists, and everybody just stopped. And the men on the team were waiting for the terrorists to raise their weapons, and so they literally had the red dots, sitting on the terrorist's forehead. And they said, as soon as, these guys lifted their weapons, we knew we'd have to shoot. But there were, 100 to 200 guys just in the woods circling us. So we knew the minute we opened fire, everybody would hear it and they'd come over and we'd all be dead. But the terrorists who approached them knew that they would die also before they got their weapons raised. So they made the decision to leave and then go, I'm assuming, and alert their counterparts and then come back. But in the process, right after they turn and leave, the French jets fly over really low and everybody took off running. So, I mean, it was within minutes of the rest of the team losing their lives.
This is like out of a movie.
Show of force, man. We used it a lot in a lot of different places, and they understand that. So yeah, it does sound like right out of a movie, but that happens a lot. I mean, you hear that all the time during
being
stories.
Isolated, being pushed out.
Yeah.
When you hear all the stuff that's happened here, I mean, yes, these kind of things happen, but how does this team get into this position anyhow? How do they get so far forward? And look, and the intel they're chasing, you and I know, we'll just talk candidly about intel here for a minute. You've got a signals intercept. And you don't know the quality of that as the commander. It could be a ping off of a tower. It could be bullshit. You just don't know. And you also know how perishable that stuff is. So when you hear this and why they're out there on the flimsiest, honestly, not even good enough intel to push a team out. What are your thoughts, man?
Well, first of all, I mean, look, every time you go into a country, you've got several different initiatives that you're trying to accomplish. If you're training the indigenous forces, that's pretty much on the surface. Okay. Every guy on a team is there to collect intel. That's what we do. One person collects it all, kind of sifts through it and sends it up forward. There's always follow-on stuff and things that are going on, initiatives by the embassy and even the host nation military. They have a lot of say in some of those things, and they can contribute significantly to it. But at the same time, you can't trust anybody. I mean, you just can't trust anybody. I mean, because it's your butt on the line, and going out on flimsy stuff like that happens all the time. I mean, it just does, and that's part of what sometimes you just get so complacent because it happens so often and you're like, I don't feel that's, even credible. And like you said, Pete, you get a ping and it's like, oh, I had a ping. Well, great. Where was that from and who was it? And, is that phone even still there? I mean, none of that stuff stays for very long.
Yeah. Are you being baited to go out and go into an ambush with these pings? Like, are they doing counter intel on you?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
And and I think that was one big issue with the intel they were using, that the guys on the team were finding, is since they had been in country, every time they would get a ping, they'd be sent down on the same intel, single source reporting, signals intelligence. And the captain had said before they sent them out again, just said, listen, like, we're doing this over and over and over. We're creating a bad rut. They're going to see what we're doing. This isn't good. And we're going after the same guy over and over based on this same intel. And he had actually had a discussion before they went out saying, why don't we let the intel build and let these guys get complacent and comfortable, and then we'll go in after them. rather than just actioning it every time. But instead, they went down on that same intel. And by then it was, I think the intel, which had a 2-hour window, they went in after that, off that intel, I think, 12 hours later. And of course, it was no good. And then they got more intel to chase it and more intel. And that just drove into the 2 follow-on missions, which led eventually to the ambush, which really, by that point, shouldn't be surprising.